Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the United Way for a bit of an exciting show today. We have Ben Jacobs on the channel to give us a bit of an update on the takeover of Manchester United. I know it's hard to know about Manchester United these days with the Glazers in charge, but Ben, how's things first of all?
Great to be here, although I didn't get the sunglasses memo. Next time I might bring my own pair.
Yeah, I know. I wish I'm wearing a hoodie. Yes, I'm in Ireland, so it's cold. I'm sure we're in Nigeria where Michael is. It's a lot more warm than it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, Michael
Uh,
from Nigeria. So I'm from Nigeria actually. So it's good to have you on, Ben.
Great to be here.
yeah, I mean, again, Michael, thanks for coming on as well. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, it is match day as well, so you can't be, having Ben Jacobs on. Manchester United are playing. Hopefully, Manchester United can win tonight. But I mean, people are already throwing in questions in the chat about takeover because us Manchester United fans are eager to get the Glazers gone. I mean, Ben, can we see the Glazers gone before the summer?
Well, I think May is about clarity, and fans won't have long to wait before the Glazers show their hand. And that's the next key step, really. They can't keep dancing around multiple options, which means that either there'll be a preferred bidder from Sir Jim Ratcliffe or Sheikh Jassim, or alternative options will be explored. And a no sale is a possibility as well. And many fans only want one outcome, which is an outright departure of the Glazers. And I can understand why. But regardless of what happens, knowing what's going to happen and on what timescale is highly important. And if the Glazers choose to stay, there'll be outrage, there'll be protests, even if they change the structure and end up as only a minority investor. But the reason why I say it's important that the Glazers show their hand is because things need to resolve themselves by the time the transfer window opens, one way or another. Otherwise, Manchester United simply cannot plan. And some of that planning is down to whether or not they make Champions League football, because that always affects the budgets. And even a new owner would be bound by what they inherit in many ways in terms of the books and the cycles for both financial fair play and the Premier League's profit and sustainability. So there's really two key points here. One, again, is the Glazers need to show categorically what direction they are moving in. And then the second one is, how long will it take? And that's a very difficult question to answer before we know the first question's answer. Because if it is to be an outright sale, things may move a lot quicker than people anticipate, because the due diligence from Jassim and Ratcliffe has been done a lot earlier than in a traditional takeover. If they go down the route of delaying because they don't have a valuation that they're prepared to accept, that obviously can add weeks to the process. And if they choose strategic investment, it may take a little bit longer, but it's less vital, because from a transition point of view, anything where the Glazers stay with their current amount of control, or anything that sees potentially two Glazers buy out four Glazers, doesn't affect the foundations and the structure of the football club as much as if an entirely new owner came in. So first we need to understand whether or not there's a preferred bidder out of Jassim and Ratcliffe. And should that happen, then sources indicate it will be relatively quick now. 7 to 10 days was the timescale given from April the 28th onwards, which would be the end of this week or the beginning of next week. And obviously, if they rule out both of them, it's almost an entirely new process that will largely focus around strategic alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, that was just. I mean, it is interesting, like, because a lot of people are kind of speaking about, say if the Glazers aren't gone, before the summer transfer window opens, how will Ten Hag react? Will he get the players he wants? Will it just ruin the plans, or do you reckon Ten Hag is just like, right, I'm just going to plan the transfer window like the Glazers are here? Because I see something this morning that was we supposedly have like 100 million to spend in the summer. Obviously, if we sell players, we can spend that amount as well. But like, how do you reckon Ten Hag is kind of going with the summer transfer window? Like, he's just going with it like the Glazers are still going to be around by then?
Well, Ten Hag's powerless in many ways, because again, he's bound by the club's books And there's no way of creating an entirely fresh start. Even as a new owner, you still have to ultimately be respectful of what you've inherited to stay within financial fair play and the Premier League's profit and sustainability. So financial fair play, UEFA rules, profit and sustainability, Premier League rules. And as a consequence, even a new owner can't do anything so dramatic that they undermine the club's books within a particular cycle. So Ten Hag's feeling is that the club needs investment, which is why there is appeal in both Sir Jim Ratcliffe and also Sheikh Jassim, because Ten Hag knows in the long run that that's what's going to help the football club, the modernisation of both the football side and also the brand. And that means putting money behind the redevelopment of Old Trafford, improving the facilities at Carrington, investing in the women's team, and so on. Then there is specifically this summer window. And on the one hand, the recruitment team can work and can go to the player side and can assess the market and can see who is available. And then on the other hand, they don't know whose money they're spending yet, which is significant. But we have to be very careful about outlining that anyone new isn't just going to drop 300, 400, 500 million with that Chelsea-like spending, because they're well aware of the books that they're inheriting. So that kind of spend would still have to come over maybe 3 to 5 windows of success, because Manchester United are ultimately coming off the back of a whole era where they've been in and out of the Champions League, and that affects your budget and what you can spend. So it isn't only that if the Glazers stayed, they wouldn't spend, and if a new owner came in, they would spend more. It's also a case of having to be respectful of the current finances of the football club and trying to improve things, which is why I've said many times, the first thing Ten Hag can do is qualify for Champions League football, and that will have a significant effect on the club spending in the summer window, whether that's with the Glazers or a new controlling owner or a new outright owner. And then if you remove what you can spend and you only talk about what you want to spend, that's maybe where there's the alarm. In other words, if Manchester United make Champions League football and they can spend a bit more, will the Glazers spend a bit more? Or are they going to tighten the purse strings? Or are they going to delay because they've not yet got the partner that they want to stay at the football club? And these are all variables that make it very difficult to predict. So in simple terms, get Champions League football, budget is higher. Bring in a new owner, they might want to spend more, but can they spend more within the financial constraints of the club? And these are all considerations. And this is why the due diligence has been so important. So everyone likes to bill it as Sheikh Jassim and he'll be the richest and the 9-2 Foundation will spend the most. And I would say that is accurate in the sense of the bigger picture and future windows and investment in the football club. But specifically in the summer, even Sheikh Jassim won't necessarily be able to drop that 350 million that Chelsea did last summer. So right now there's this feeling that it's about 100 million that Manchester United could comfortably spend. With Champions League football, maybe that's 120 to 150 million at a push and depending on outgoings. And then a new owner might find a way to go a little bit higher than that. And it's a little bit bizarre in a way, because usually if we say 150 to 200 million, historically, everyone would be quite excited by that. But such is modern football that now Chelsea have gone over 300 million, that everyone feels like it needs to be 350 million, it needs to be 400 million. And I think Liverpool and Manchester United have that position whereby if you want a flagship player, such as a Kane, such as an Osimhen, and obviously we've seen this with the race for Bellingham as well, who looks likely to go to Real Madrid, you have to take a massive chunk of that budget. So if Manchester United go, let's just say for Kane, and Osimhen might even be more expensive, there's your 100 million. So then do you have enough left to maybe address the goalkeeper situation, maybe address the right back situation, maybe address the midfield situation? Maybe not, unless you're smart or unless there's more outgoings from the club. So I think where Ten Hag is desperate for answers is actually not in money, but stability. Because Sir Jim Ratcliffe will have his own football people in mind. Sheikh Jassim are looking for a football lead. Under the Glazers, the structure may stay the same, or a director of football may come in. And how does Ten Hag really know where the recruitment model is going unless there's that stability in the ownership situation, in the foundational situation at the club, and in any football personnel that they're going to bring in. And that, I think, is why the process dragging on undermines Manchester United's summer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there about, Kane and Osimhen. If we get one of those, that could probably half of our budget done. So you can't look at maybe a midfielder or a defender, which I think we need another defender especially. So we look at Varane and Martinez who are out. I mean, someone asked a question there. Is it possible for bidders to change or amend their bids even though deadline has passed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a final offer, but that's only from a process point of view, because we're talking about final offer in the context of multiple suitors. And then should a preferred bidder be picked, they enter into a traditional final stage after the final offer stage, when you would always haggle over price, you would always go up and down. So what will be interesting is if nobody's met the Glazers' valuation, whether the bidders get told that. In other words, you're not rejected as in kicked out the process because we've picked someone else. You're all rejected, and then it would be not just that's it. It would be you're all rejected unless you go up in offer. And that could be a tactic on the side of the seller to see whether they can get the number a little bit higher. So there's nothing stopping either the seller going and telling those that have made final offers they're not high enough and seeing what happens. And there's also nothing stopping those that are bidding feeling like perhaps they're losing or they need to do something that ultimately moves from the process and takes things more in their control. And that's where with Sheikh Jassim, if the offer is genuinely lower than Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and that is the indication, who's to say that the 9-2 Foundation won't come back with something improved? And because Manchester United is a publicly listed company, and because they have a responsibility to put all offers to the Glazers, the process is your framework, but it's not the be-all and the end-all. And until any preferred bidder is picked or until any deal is signed, anybody technically could come in. So you or me, if we had the proof of funds, could in theory say, we've missed every single deadline, we're not part of the process, but here's 10 billion, and I'm only using that as an extreme example, here's proof of funds, it's all cash, there's no debt, take it or leave it. And if we were credible, which unfortunately I'm not, I don't have 10 billion or even a billion, but if I was credible, then there would be that possibility, because it's not like a job interview or a deadline when you hand in your thesis and you miss it and therefore you're out of the process. It's a soft deadline always, because Manchester United will always have a responsibility to put a credible offer to the Glazers and the minority stakeholders, providing it comes before another deal is signed. So this allows for a bit more flexibility than perhaps people realize.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, we know the two favorites for the Manchester United Football Club, it's just Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim. And I think a couple of weeks ago, or about last week, I think we were told Sir Jim Ratcliffe came out to be the most favorite to get the club. But I think maybe what the media or the news outlets and maybe more journalists aren't telling us is just how much. Because as far as I know, I think we were told a non-disclosure agreement was signed. Most persons feel Sheikh Jassim's own bid or offer isn't disclosed, so there are a lot of speculation. So do you know, or do you think or feel that Sheikh Jassim, on the other hand, he may have his own bid, which is way higher than Sir Jim Ratcliffe, or could it be just PR, or could it just be the media trying to, to make it in favor of Sir Jim Ratcliffe? Or do you feel at one side, maybe Sheikh Jassim's own bid is more lucrative and more than Sir Jim Ratcliffe? So what can you say about that?
Well, I think the media are not trying to manufacture a winner, not credible media. And you go to all sides. And as you rightly say, all parties are under NDA, so should not be sharing or leaking in any way a specific offer. But as journalists, we have a responsibility to develop contacts and try and assess where we're at. And you do that by speaking to a variety of people. And the feeling in doing that is that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has bid higher. And when you don't want 100% of the club, it is often normal within a takeover to go a little bit higher. Because remember, and I'm only using these numbers for maths rather than saying that they're to be affiliated with either Ratcliffe or Jassim. If he offers 5 billion, that number is your 100% valuation of the club. And this process requires you to value 100% of the club. So that is all the Glazers shares and all of the minority, 100% of the club. So then if Ratcliffe only wants, let's just say 50%, again, for the sake of the maths, then his outlay in this process, which are only for the Glazers 69%, his outlay for 50% of the Glazers shares, if his offer is £5 billion, is £2.5 billion. So the lower percentage you want, the higher you might bid, because your outlay is ultimately for a smaller percentage. Whereas with Sheikh Jassim, he plans to buy 100% of the club, which means if his offer is 5 billion, then he'll pay 69% of 5 billion to the Glazers, and then he'll have to proceed to try and delist the public shares to get to 100%. And Jassim is very confident in that, because there's always been a feeling that if the price is good enough for the Glazers, then it will equally be good enough for the minority shareholders as well. And I think that is a very fair assumption. So then when we talk about the specific amounts placed, nobody will ever show you, at least not to me anyway, something that's under NDA. And that's simply because to get that documentation would be a clear breach of the process. But what you're doing as a journalist is you are putting things you're hearing from people that are insiders, that are directly in the room. And ultimately, through doing that, you can often get to a ballpark. You can often get a clear indication of where the sides are at. And when insiders on all sides are acknowledging that Ratcliffe is in all likelihood higher than Jassim, that tells you everything. Those close to the Jassim bid don't deny that they're lower than Ratcliffe. They simply point out that it would be normal if you are bidding 100% and someone else only wants either 69% or 50% to be lower. And when they're telling you that, it probably suggests that their intel is also that Ratcliffe is higher and potentially has been all along. So then the key question in all of this, and this is why we had confusion after the bid, is how much higher? So the Jassim side are clear that they've made a competitive offer that is around about £5 billion, and sources close to that 9-2 foundation indicate the pledged investment of just under £1 billion or $1 billion is on top. Whereas there are credible sources that state the numbers inflated by the pledged investment and actually is around 5 billion all in, which would make it significantly lower than previous indications. And that's where there's confusion, because there's two sides. Now, we'll come on to Ratcliffe in a moment, but why might there be confusion? You can argue for a variety of reasons. One is that the Jassim side have put a lower number on the table and are genuinely inflating it using pledged investment. The pledged investment is important, but we shouldn't read too much into it, because Ratcliffe's going to have pledged investment as well. But he just doesn't need to list it for this purpose. The only number that matters is the 100% club valuation. Anything else you say is great. Anything else that you bind yourself by is vital to the football club, but it doesn't make the blindest bit of difference in this process. The only number that matters is your valuation for 100% of the club, from which the Glazers will either accept or reject. And that is how you get a deal. Pledged investment is great. It's essential. But whether you say it now or whether you just do it after you're in, it's exactly the same thing in many ways. And Ratcliffe and Jassim are both saying the same thing, that they're going to invest in Old Trafford, that they're going to invest in Carrington, that they're going to invest in the women's team, and so on. So one theory is that the Jassim bid was just lower. And as a consequence, Jim Ratcliffe is a front runner at this point if the Glazers are happy with his valuation. If not, they may turn to strategic alternatives. The other theory is that if the Glazers have decided, two of them, Joel and Avram in particular, that they want to stay, then it is in the interests of the Glazers to start a narrative of PR and games to suggest that they're not only staying because they like a structure, whether that's Ratcliffe or elsewhere, they're staying because it was the best offer. And I can guarantee you, if the Glazers stay, we will hear in hindsight it's the best offer, not just the best structure for them, not just the best deal for them, but the best valuation and offer. Because we all know there will be unthinkable fan reaction if Jassim is the highest offer and the Glazers pick something else. So you can interpret it in a number of ways. Maybe Jassim just isn't who he says he is. And there's still a lot of questions about that 9-2 foundation. But of course, it's popular with fans because they just want the Glazers out. So that is one theory, that maybe, just maybe, the 9-2 foundation, who have gone through intermediaries throughout this process, who have not really ever shown their true hand, maybe, just maybe, the 9-2 foundation are not who they say they are. Or maybe they are, and the Glazers just want to go in a different direction. And if the Glazers go in a different direction, Jassim doesn't stand a chance because he's not flexible like Ratcliffe. Jassim is only about all or nothing. And obviously, if two of the Glazers want to stay and they were to accept another group, and that might be Ratcliffe, it might be Carlisle, it could be any strategic investor, there needs to be an explanation, whether now or in hindsight, that says there wasn't a sky-high, perfect offer that we rejected just because we wanted to stay. So that's when PR could come in. And obviously, as journalists, we're not stupid. We're not just putting things out there and swallowing it verbatim. We're going to all sides, which is why we've been forced to report at this point there's confusion. So we're not saying Jassim's bid is only low, and we're not saying that the selling side are playing games, and we're not saying that it's definitely pledged money inside 5 billion, and we're not saying that it's definitely 5 billion with pledged investment. We're giving you all sides and context because there are credible people all around the process that know the reality, and two different sides are being presented. So at this point, all we can do is explain those sides to you and explain why there might be confusion and different sides, which hopefully I've outlined. And now we'll have to wait and see whether it's a game to get Jassim to go higher. It's a game because the Glazers want to pave the way for saying they stayed and with the best offer, or whether actually Jassim just hasn't put down a very good offer. And those, I think, are the three options at this point.
Yeah.
I mean,
sorry. The thing is, we know the Glazers want 6 billion. We know the Glazers.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. That again has been a myth of the whole sale. There's plenty of people that say the Glazers' valuation is on a sliding scale, depending on offer, of $6 to $7 billion, which means the top end of that scale would be 5.6 billion. So people like to think that the Glazers are up here and the suitors are down there, but it genuinely may not be the case. So I think it's worth pointing that out as well.
Yeah, I think the Glazers are just chancing their arm. 6 billion. I mean, some people are saying it's not even worth that the way they've treated us over the last 18 years or so. Some people think it's worth 3 or 4 billion. And other Manchester United fans are worried that the Glazers might accept the Ratcliffe bid just because they still have a little bit of a say. The Glazers, even when they put the club up for sale, I'm sure everyone knew, the club's not going to be sold in the next 3 or 4 months because it's the Glazers. They're going to make life hard for, Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim. We have a question there from Kivash, I think I'm saying his name right. He says, does a full sale appear likely? I noticed reports on minority investment has been much more quiet during this round of bids.
It's only been quiet because there's two deadlines. So April the 28th was solely a deadline for Ratcliffe and Jassim. And that's either to move forwards with or effectively rule out a full sale or a new controlling owner. And then you have the strategic partners and minority investors. Some are financiers, some want preferred equity, some want minority stakes. That's where they could come in, but they're not bound by the same April 28th deadline. So the focus at this point is only on two groups, and to determine whether one of them is worth moving forwards with. And if not, that's when all of these other groups like Sixth Street or Carlisle or Elliott or Aries will all be able to come back to the table. And they're also kept in because some of them are willing to not just work with the Glazers, but work with other groups. So you could also have a scenario where Ratcliffe gets told his offer's not good enough and needs further external partners or financing in order to get something done. And this is again why Ratcliffe is flexible. But Jassim isn't interested in partnering if he is going to proceed. He's got his own funding, and the source of that needs to be made clearer because it's not from his dad, it's not from QIA. Then he's going into the next stage with an all or nothing approach. So if the Glazers turn around and say, listen, we would sell, but we want to keep 10%, Jassim's walking away. But Ratcliffe isn't. But I think before people judge, they need to understand that when Ratcliffe is flexible, it means he'll take the 69%. He'll take the 50% if he has to. It's sort of dealer's choice, which means that he's trying to present an offer that says to the Glazers, if you'll give me everything, I'll take everything. But if your decision is two of you are going to stay, or however many of you are going to stay, then as long as you give me control of the club, I'm willing to go down that route as well. Which means that with Ratcliffe, there's no scenario where the Glazers would have any day-to-day power. They would give up their Class B voting power, and it doesn't matter that there's a mechanism currently to protect the family with shares that are worth 10 times more the voting power. Ratcliffe is saying, divide it up how you like, but the structure will be that I am the controlling owner of this football club. So if any Glazers remain, they'll only do so in a minority sense. And once again, we mustn't confuse Ratcliffe as being somebody who is only trying now to move into the football club with the Glazers. What he's actually saying is, I want control, and I would love, if I can get it, all 69% and for you to leave. But if you've decided that nothing is going to get done unless two of the Glazers stay, that's when Ratcliffe is saying, okay, this is another option that I'm prepared to entertain, again with control. Whereas Jassim is saying it's 100% or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of United fans as well, not a lot, but some Manchester United fans would have liked Ratcliffe to come in because, Man United fan, richest man's posing in England. And then ever since you've seen that the Glazers, so once have the Glazers on board, people have got a bit turned off and have been looking at Qatar because they want full sale, all that. But do you reckon if Ratcliffe does take over, do you reckon there'll just be even a lot more noise from the Manchester United fans? Like I said it yesterday when me and another lad on the channel doing a preview, and I said, Jim Ratcliffe takes over. I mean, is there a point doing a protest 2-3 days after? Just gonna be. And then a lot of other people were saying, could we have a Malcolm Glazer situation? Because I think Ratcliffe's in his 60s or something like that. I'm not too sure. But a lot of fans, bit of mix now at the moment, but more leaning towards Sheikh Jassim.
Well, I would see Jassim and Ratcliffe as just front-facing names at this point. So they're not going to be the day-to-day Manchester United people, which means that the age of Ratcliffe or Jassim and his, at the moment, relatively vague 9-2 foundation in terms of the makeup are less important than who they actually end up recruiting. And I'm hesitant for people to interpret this as a like-for-like scenario, but Chelsea is an example in some respects, whereby Behdad Eghbali, even though he's more hands-on than either Ratcliffe or Jassim would be directly, hasn't come in as, if you like, a Chelsea employee embedded there day on day with the Chelsea title, he represents the controlling owner. And Ratcliffe and Jassim would be exactly the same. They would be active, not as active as Egbali, but there will be other people that are more responsible for the day-to-day running of the business. And the advantage of the Ratcliffe bid is that Ineos have got a huge amount of knowledge and experience within sport, not just in football, but outside of it as well. So Sir Dave Brailsford's task is effectively to go out there and get the best in class of whatever football experts that group feel they need if they're successful. And similarly, Sheikh Jassim will, via his advisor, Ferdi Bakhos, be kept in the loop, but not in that day-to-day, not necessarily getting his hands dirty, not moving to Manchester, which means that, of course, there's that decision-making process that will always, at any club, feed up to the top. But you'll have other experts on the football side and on the business side. So the age of any one individual or the plan going forwards from either group will not be important or contingent on the names that you're hearing about now. It will all be about fronting a bid, winning, and then finding the right day-to-day people, of which I don't actually expect it to be either Ratcliffe or Jassim. There'll be others that are sort of reporting back up to them, because Jassim's got a variety of other business assets, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe is very much going to stay Ineos rather than Manchester United. But being a Manchester United fan, of course, there'll be that passion, that involvement, that visibility, but don't confuse that with 365 days a year of doing a 9 to 5 at Manchester United's offices. Those will be other kind of people, and that is very normal for any of the owners. So like a lot of people always ask me what bid is best, and we have to be very careful in answering that, because it's so easy in advance to just say all the right things, and it's about the practical reality of implementing those things. And also, everybody is judging this in light of what's the best case scenario. Glazers out. So it's about fueling a desire to replace them, and therefore anyone that says they want 100% replace the Glazers is a better bid to a lot of fans. But once the Glazers, or if the Glazers go, then it's about looking at these groups. And this is why, as journalists, we can't wait, but fan bases may. We have to have that scrutiny now. Are they right for the Premier League? Are they right for the football club? Are they who they say they are? Are they going to spend what they say they are? Fans right now are quite happy just to say anyone that helps get the Glazers out is a hero, and they say they're going to do this and they say they're going to do that. But we have to make sure as journalists they're legit. Do they really have the money? Do they really have the makeup? Who are they really? Are they who they say they are? And again, if I'm buying a football club now, I'm pretty much sure that if I came out and I was credible and I told you I want to invest in the men and women's team, I'm quite prepared to spend big in the summer window. We're going to get Manchester United back to winning the Champions League and the Premier League next season. Eric Ten Hag's vital to the club. Marcus Rashford is vital to the club. The women's team are going to surpass Chelsea and win all of the domestic trophies next season. I'm going to redevelop Old Trafford, and it's going to be the best stadium in the world, and I'm going to start tomorrow. And my God, we're going to be better than Manchester City in all of our facilities and all of our brand growth. You'll be down on the ground bowing to me saying, what a great bid, what a great bid. Yeah. But how do you know it's legit? Because it is all just words. So I think this is where journalism comes in, and we often get attacked because maybe we find something negative and everyone says, no, they're rich, they've got the money, look what they're going to do. So again, when you judge the best bid, judge the wording, of course, it's important. And judge it on the fact that everybody at large in the Manchester United fan base wants the Glazers gone. But also do your due diligence and be careful to understand whoever's coming in might now appear better than the Glazers, but we still have to make sure that after they're in, what they've said they're going to do is honest and genuine, not just words. And that's where I think a lot of the journalism going forwards, if we get a preferred bidder, might focus to make sure that these groups are indeed who they say they are. And with Ineos, that's what's the relationship like with Nice, and what have they done with Nice, and is it good or bad? Because not everyone's that happy about Nice. And it's also who's the sporting director, And it's also what's the pledged investment, because they've not specified it. And with Jassim, it's about who's actually in their group and have they actually got the money, and is there actually, as is suspected, a direct Emir involvement, and is there sports washing at play as a consequence? So, if we say the Glazers are leaving, there'll be celebration. But after that, there has to be scrutiny as to who these groups actually are and whether or not they're going to keep their word. And I'm not coming down on a side and saying one's good, one's bad. I'm just saying that it would be nuts for a fan with a club this big and a brand this big and an investment this big not to do their own due diligence to make sure that not just they're comfortable with the Glazers leaving, which of course everyone is, but they're comfortable with whoever comes in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
So it is. Another question for you, Ben. I think everyone asking Ben questions. It's hard to get through them. But do you think Ten Hag will be given money in the next transfer window? So, will he get what he wants? Will he get the funds? Or will it be the 100 million we spoke about at the start?
Well, with Champions League football, I think he will be able to move relatively freely in the market, but he might have to look at outgoings as well in order to generate more money. So there's a player, for example, like Scott McTominay, who we know from a selfish point of view, Eric Ten Hag would keep because that's depth. But Newcastle came calling in January and they'll come calling again in the summer. And McTominay knows that it's quite hard to get into that midfield. So that's the kind of thing where if you want one player, you might say, okay, we're going to have to move in a different direction with an outgoing, that if money wasn't an object and if the player was happy enough in his current role, we would keep. And as soon as you start looking at outgoings, that's when the finances may become a little bit more flexible. But the recruitment team may make an argument of we've got to get rid of X to bring in Y if they proceed and sign a Kane, sign an Osimhen, etc. And Eric Ten Hag may say, I'd rather not do that, but I have a choice to make. If I want Y, maybe I do have to sell X. And it will all just depend again on, are Manchester United going to do one key thing, which is go out there and get a traditional number 9 at high value? And if they do that, that's a massive chunk of anyone's budget. Even if the budget was double the 100 million. If you go out and buy Osimhen at 120 million pounds or Kane at 100 plus million, you're just not left in Premier League standards in the modern era with the market inflated with a massive amount of money. So that's when, if you want a centre-back, you may say, let's try for Evan Ndicka, who's a free transfer and a fantastic player, by the way. Or if you want a midfielder, you may say, you know what? We know that Alexis McAllister is an option, but that's a 60 to 70 million outlay. So why not? And by the way, Manchester United fans, I'm not saying this player is linked with you, but why not? Only giving it as an example because he's free transfer, are Yuri Tielemans. Because then you've still got a depth Premier League player of quality, and the same for Ndicka, but it allows you to get your Harry Kane or your Victor Osimhen. So outgoings are important. Value in the market is important. Understanding the races that you can win are important. They don't drag on. And Manchester United need to learn that lesson from the Frenkie de Jong saga. And then what's the number? Well, there's never really a number. That's the myth with transfer windows. Because the leeway comes in, one, how you amortize. So if the contract's longer, you can spread the transfer fee over more years, but then that number catches up with you on future cycles. And number two is the fact that the constraints come from window planning. So Manchester United could probably spend 200, 300 million even as is if the Glazers sanctioned it or a new owner sanctioned it. But how does that then affect your next January or the next windows within the cycle? And if you really want a player, you might choose to spend a bit more in a window, but then it will catch up on you further down the line. And there'll also be a desire from Manchester United not to gamble until they're in a position whereby that Champions League football is season on season on season, and they're kind of automatic qualifiers. So Newcastle's a good example of this. They could have spent a little bit more, and they obviously spent big in that January when they were trying to stay up, but they're conscious that that signing isn't just a fee, but you might have to break your wage structure, and then suddenly other players might want increases. And if in another season's time you don't have European football, you're lumped with that. So Manchester United have always been quite smart because they've had this decrease if the team doesn't make Champions League football. But we don't know whether the new owners are going to continue with that or have a different kind of wage structure. So there's a lot of different variables here. And I know that fans listening will sort of say, and I constantly get it, that's just waffling. That's just not knowing what the number is. That's just dodging around the simple answer we want, which is Manchester United are going to spend exactly £136 million. But this is where you get sucked into false headlines because recruitment teams don't look at numbers ever. They look at value. And if they feel that they can make 3 signings at value and they're each, let's just say, 70 million, then unless the club's going to go bust, they'll spend that money. And then at another window or with another outgoing or with another contract or with another commercial deal, they'll have to find a way to balance the books. And that is how it always works and always will work. And because you're window planning ahead, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows, this is why you don't blow a load in one window, because Manchester United might get injuries and they might need to leave some money for January. Manchester United might have a great season, but suddenly find that one key player gets injured or is past their best or goes to another club, and that's unexpected. And again, in the following January or summer, they might need to spend again. So everyone wants to just hear, new owner, 250 million. But it won't work like that. If there's value in spending 250 million, they'll find a way to spend 250 million, but make no mistake, there'll be consequences to that because they'll either have to offer longer term contracts or they'll have to try and get those players on lesser wages, or they'll have to have more outgoings, or it will catch up further down the line. And my club's Leicester. And when we won the Premier League, we did exactly that. We found a way to spend because we'd won the Premier League, we had Champions League football. What happened to Leicester 4 or 5 years down the line in the last summer window? Brendan Rodgers had to sell Wesley Fofana to Chelsea and could not bring in really anybody because the club just knew that the numbers didn't add up. And they'd spent on a new training facility as well. And there's a planned expansion of the King Power Stadium. And again, think about this in the context of Manchester United. They've got to expand Old Trafford. They've got to modernise the facilities. All of these are just outlay. So there comes a point where you have to be sensible. So the first thing is qualify for Champions League because whoever's in charge, there's budget. The second thing is decide if you want Kane or Osimhen, or you don't want one player to eat up all of your outlay. And that's the decision Liverpool made. It's better to put their budget on 4 or 5 than 1. And then the third thing is how much risk do you want within your current finances of gambling on the now? But if it doesn't pay off, or you don't get better commercial deals, or you don't bring in more money through outgoings, then in a window or 2, you may have to then spend a whole lot less. And that's kind of where Barcelona are at. They spent all of their money by activating levers despite being in financial trouble, and it didn't pay off in the Champions League. And they won't be able to do that again this summer because they chose to spend all of the money that they could kind of make work on the players last summer. And now if they want to bring back Messi, they're going to have to get him to agree to join again on a lower salary. And if they bring Messi back, even on a free transfer, they might not be able to sign 2 or 3 other players like Bernardo Silva, for example, that they've been considering for the last few windows. So it's a balance across multiple windows. It's a balance between incomings and outgoings. It's not ever just a nice round number that fans can think of as the guaranteed spend. But of course, anybody that now just tweets, Eric Ten Hag's going to get a 350 million war chest from Sheikh Jassim, and he's going to sign Kane, and he's going to sign Osimhen, and he's going to bring a right back, and he's going to bring a centre back, and he's going to bring a goalkeeper. That type of reporting is heroed, but it's just not factually correct with how football works.
Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to do that. Like, I mean, a lot of Manchester United fans would love to hear that, but I mean, it is interesting to see. I mean, there's a lot more questions to think or to ask you. I mean, another one. Are the Glazers uncertain on what to do? Presumably, I think I'm saying that word right.
Not necessarily. I mean, this is why they have to show their true hand. We may find all along that Joel and Avram have decided the valuations are high enough that they've always been prepared to stay. And now they're just trying to work out whether that's through Jassim or some kind of strategic investment. I think in the early part of the process, the whole point of the process was to add clarity. And you can understand when there's 6 siblings, why they might not all be unified. It's very easy to just keep saying Glazers without forgetting the S. There's 6 siblings. And then it's equally as neat to say that 2 want to stay and 4 want to go. But my understanding from sources has always been that all 6 will sell at the right number. So if the number hasn't been hit and that is not a greedy number, then you can also understand why the 6 siblings may realign and say, okay, we haven't managed to hit a number, so now 4 still want to go at a lower number, and maybe 2 do want to stay. And the Glazers get hammered for a variety of things, rightly so, of course, from the fan base. But one thing you can't really criticize anybody for is just trying to sell something they own at the highest possible price. And when there's 6 of them, there might be 6 different estimations over what that price is. And there might be 6 different approaches. And there might be a series of family meetings needed. So it would be really easy for the Glazers, in my opinion, if a sky-high offer was placed. And then I genuinely believe all 6 would go. But what is a sky-high offer? And this is where there is different sides, different numbers. Remember, when the process first started, we heard it was a 6 to 8 billion valuation, which is a ridiculous thing to say because there's 2 billion difference there. That's Chelsea Football Club almost, based on their own sale. So 6 to 8 million in a transfer is an accurate ballpark. 6 to 8 billion is basically just picking 2 numbers that are miles apart. And to go into that process hoping for 6 to 8 billion is really just nonsense. And again, in a process, high numbers are always going to be quoted because the seller is never going to reveal a genuine number. Otherwise, the prospective buyers will just use that to their advantage. So what happens in any sale, and it's very normal, it's not the Glazers being greedy, it's every single takeover I've ever covered, is if it plays out publicly, a very high number gets quoted because the buyers don't know the price. So it creates competitive tension by constantly peddling this high number, whatever that number is. And then similarly on the buyer's side, you constantly get, they won't bid recklessly and they go in low. And then eventually there's either a compromise or actually the parties are miles apart, in which case the Glazers will have to turn to other options. So I think the one thing you can't criticize the Glazers for is selling one of the world's biggest assets and the biggest sports club in the world, certainly the biggest football club in the world in terms of what it's going to sell for. Yeah. You can't criticize them for wanting a really, really good price. And if people think that price is 6, 7, 8 billion, part of that is the game of the sale, which means that you can hear that number and say they're greedy because the enterprise value of the club is about 3.6 billion at the moment. But again, it's a game to try and get the highest possible price. It's the same when you sell a car. It's the same when you sell a house. And similarly, the buyers are never going to go in and say, we accept that that's an okay valuation. They're going to say, we want it for the best possible amount. And again, if you bid for a car, you bid for a house, very rarely are you going to come in at a high number to begin with. So this is just a negotiation. And I don't think the Glazers are massively at fault by trying to get the best possible number. But I think where there's become a roadblock is Manchester United needs a lot done. There's foundational issues, there's modernization issues, there's a football structure that needs to be arguably redone and put in place. There's the men's team, there's the women's team, there's improvement of facilities, there's transfer budget, all of which to get Manchester United back to the things that make you money: Champions League football, Club World Cup, and commercial deals and brand growth. And they've all been a bit untouched and unloved. So everyone coming into the club says, we've got debt and we've got all these things. So how can you possibly expect us to be at 5.5, 6.5, 7.5 billion when the enterprise value of the club is basically 3.5 billion? We're already miles over that. It should be a fantastic deal. And I think that's the perspective of both Ratcliffe and Jassim, which is why they say they don't want to overpay, because they're already overpaying from the enterprise value of the club. Whatever happens, if a deal is done, it will be well over $1 billion beyond the enterprise value of the club, which tells you everything. So there's a game going on. But again, within that game, the Glazers cannot be faulted for simply trying to get the best possible price. That's just business.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Michael, there's loads of more questions, but you want to try anything, Michael, for get the people in the comments get their questions answered?
Yeah, of course. The reports we've had over time still boils down to the fact that, the Glazers still have to assent to whatever bid they want, or whatever choice of bid, if you know what I mean. So is it that they must, or they are the only ones that must assent to a particular bid, or they must approve and say, okay, I think this is the type or the kind of bid we want. I think it's okay. So must it just be the Glazers? Because they are coming up, the reports, like I said before, made us realize that they want this particular sum. They value the club with these numbers. So are they the only ones, or is there anyone else aside the Glazers who, must assent to maybe Jim Ratcliffe or Sheikh Jassim's? Because the Raine group being the intermediary, do they have any power whatsoever accorded to them to say, okay, to choose for the Glazers, or are they still subject to the Glazers in terms of approving any potential bid?
It's all on the Glazers, but Raine Group are trusted and they've been employed to put a process together. So as the process advances, the Glazers become more involved. But when you're finding groups, shortlisting groups, assessing indicative offers, looking at paperwork and proof of funds, holding meetings in Manchester, Raine are basically the instigators of all of that. And that's why the Glazers were not in Manchester for any of the meetings. But ultimately, once you get to a point where final offers come in, all Raine can really do is present them, and they can present a recommendation. And, Raine are not like an HR company doing a job interview. Raine themselves are experts in this field and financial experts, which means that if Joe Ravitch, for example, who is the founder of Raine, says this is a great deal, then in all likelihood, there'll be some weight in that opinion. But Raine are not there to pick. Raine are there to shortlist and facilitate a process, and the Glazers are there to feedback. So if Raine say they're all terrible offers, and the Glazers say we'll take one anyway, or if Raine say this is the best offer, and the Glazers say we prefer this offer, then it's for Raine to communicate that and to ultimately take the process to a point of it actually going from seeking investment or new owners to concluding. And that's what everybody wants, even the Glazers. The Glazers are looking for this process to end as quickly as possible too. Because if they stay, they need the clarity heading into the window. If they go, then the groups looking for a controlling stake or an outright stake are ultimately desperately hoping to get in for the beginning of the window. And if it is some form of strategic investment, the Glazers still need that money to move on with various projects. So no one's trying to delay this, but it is a business transaction. It comes with its complications, and Raine are there to make it as easy as possible. And Raine have really done an excellent job in many ways. And people will disagree with that. They'll laugh at that even. They'll say there's been delays, twists, turns, confusion. But this is so normal for any kind of takeover that is played out this publicly and with so many groups still involved. It was the same with Chelsea. I've covered many takeovers out of the Middle East, Manchester City, Arsenal's investment from Emirates, which obviously wasn't a takeover, but still had an element of games because there was a tender process to it. Leeds United's ill-fated takeover from Dubai and Bahraini group, or Newcastle's takeover. They all have games, they all have twists, they all have turns. Very rarely is a deadline. When you're a publicly listed company like Manchester United, you can't necessarily have one singular hard deadline, because somebody can come in late. And also, by the way, when you're bidding and there's this many groups, you're trying to delay, you're trying to bid as late as possible because you want to know what somebody else has played. And the best way of doing that is let them play their hand and try and find out what that hand is, and then ultimately come in afterwards. So there's all manner of things. But a takeover is like having a baby. It will take 9 months. And that is the reality of a normal takeover. And that's one that doesn't have delays. And that's one that maybe happens a bit more secretive, a singular group, and then ultimately an exclusive period. And then if you're lucky, after a month or two of due diligence, some kind of acquisition or transaction. Whereas this process has not even lasted 9 months. And most of the deadlines have not moved considerably. But because there's this feeling of looking at it in transfer terms, and because there's this snowballing, particularly on social media, support for Jassim, and because there's this hope that Easter was a possibility, somehow people think that Raine have dropped the ball and that everything's been delayed. It really hasn't. This is a process that, even if it gets done at the end of May or the beginning of June, will have moved significantly faster than every single takeover I've ever covered in 15 years of journalism, except for Chelsea. So it's worth just bearing that in mind, that the process isn't the problem. The games are the problem. And maybe the valuation is the problem, and maybe the Glazers are the problem, but the process really is not the issue at the heart of all of this. It's either the Glazers being undecided, or it's games, or it's the fact that the Glazers are decided and nobody's hit the valuation. But the manner in which the Raine Group have carried this out, for me, has felt very normal, very expected, and very on track.
Yeah, that's it. Well said. Huddersfield Town Fan TV says, is there any possibility that some other interested party could make a late bid to hijack the current ones?
I mean, it's possible. Once again, as I said before, Manchester United is a publicly listed company, and if a credible offer is made outside of the process or late in the process, it has to be considered. But I think that, unlike Chelsea, there's been a much lower volume of interested parties regarding either a controlling stake or an outright purchase. So given how much it will cost to buy Manchester United, I would be surprised if somebody, as an outright bidder anyway, came in late and suddenly said, sorry, I'm late to the process, but I'm willing to bid 6 billion. That feels a bit ambitious and unlikely to me. But you can never say never. And interestingly, with Chelsea, that was what Jim Ratcliffe did. He waited until Clearlake Bowley were in an exclusive period, and it was a race against time, and they were 14 days away from owning the club. And Jim Ratcliffe issued a statement outside of the process saying he wished to buy Chelsea Football Club. So these things can happen. Ratcliffe's example proves that. But often at this stage in a process, when it looks like heading towards a conclusion, anyone that does that is just looking for PR, and they're not credible, and they want to put it out there that they've got the money, they want to get the exposure. And this is really interesting, by the way, with Ratcliffe, and I can only give you my personal opinion here, so don't take this as holy grail. I always try and inform you based on sources, but this is just one theory, and I'm only putting it out there because it's a theory that's repeated by sources, but we'll never know until we get the opportunity to put it to Ratcliffe. The feeling why he would bid outside of the process for Chelsea at the time was because he knew it was too late to win. And he wanted to send a message out there at that time that he had the money, funds, appetite, and desire to buy a football club. And then he could say, well, I tried for Chelsea, but they wouldn't let me in the process because Clearlake Bowley were already basically in. It was too far along. And, you know, if you had the money and had the desire and had the appetite, why not just enter the process for Chelsea earlier? That process was obvious. It was clear, but he didn't. So why would you then issue a public statement when it's too late to buy Chelsea, saying that you've got about 4.5 billion to buy a football club, 2.5 billion or so in price, and about 1.75 billion plus anything extra for pledged investment, because that was the deal for Chelsea. It was about a 4.5 even investment, of which the base price was one number, and then Roman Abramovich wanted to protect the club, so he added a necessity for pledged investment within the bid. So what you're saying, if you bid outside of the process, is I've got 4.5 billion and I can buy something, and I want to buy Chelsea. But did he really, or was it just a game? And one theory is that he was putting out there at that point that he had the money to see whether or not it turned the head of the Glazers. And now we know, off the back of that Chelsea price, the Glazers and FSG at Liverpool are exploring these possibilities, because Chelsea sale rocked the market a bit. It said, hang on a minute, there's 4 or 5 groups that are readily able and willing to drop 2.5 billion. And we're Manchester United, and we know that we're double that. Maybe we're treble that. And look at all these groups. Look at all this interest. And who was the Chelsea sale run by? Raine Group. And who did Manchester United turn to? Raine Group. And who did Jim Ratcliffe try and bid last minute at? Raine Group. And who's Jim Ratcliffe now entered the process early with and properly with? Raine Group. So there's one theory out there that Ratcliffe's bid for Chelsea was really all about turning the head of the Glazers and seeing whether or not it sent a message out there to say, you can come to me, I'm unsuccessful with Chelsea, but I've still got that same money there, and I'm willing to buy your football club because I'm a Manchester United fan. I would not say that that is a definite thing that happened, but if Ratcliffe is successful for Manchester United, it's one of the first questions that I would ask him.
Yeah, I like it. Adas says, I think the Glazers will go with Dinios bid. He's just too complicated in his structure, while his Qatar bid is much more straightforward and will be a smoother transaction. Another question says, not sure maybe if you can you go through the structure of both deals that is on the table? Which deal is the best one in your opinion, Ben? Says Huddersfield Town TV.
Yeah, I mean, the best deal is not really for me to judge. It's slightly irresponsible as a journalist to say which one's better. It doesn't take a rocket scientist when you compare them to see that one is for 100% of the club, including delisting the public shares. The other is for at best 69 and possibly 50-20 with 2 of the Glazers staying. So the best deal, if you're a fan of Manchester United and you want the Glazers out, is either Ratcliffe taking 69% or Jassim taking 100%. The best deal for the debt is in all likelihood Jassim, because ultimately it's unclear how Sir Jim Ratcliffe is going to handle that.
Yeah.
The best deal in terms of valuation is up to the Glazers to decide. The best deal in terms of structure is up to the Glazers to decide. And the difference between structure, as I said before, is just that Jassim is only in for 100% of the club. So he has to win this process, and that gets him to 69. And then separate to this process, he has to get to 100%. 100% is not available via this process, only 69. But if the price is good enough for the Glazers, it's likely to be good enough for enough of the other shareholders. And then there is an ability to squeeze out the rest contractually to get Jassim to 100%. So there is a confidence that if he gets 69, he'll get 100. And then with Ratcliffe, it isn't just a structure, it's structures with an S on the end. And he's being flexible. As I said before, he's saying it's dealer's choice. If you want to sell the 69, I'll take the 69. And if you want to only sell 50 and keep about 20, I'll allow that as well, as long as you don't keep your Class B voting power. Therefore, we have to understand the Glazers' thinking before we start to look at the structures in more detail and what they're prepared to entertain. But Ratcliffe is clear. He's not going to provide a situation where he comes in with any of the Glazers remaining with any kind of control. It's control or nothing for Ratcliffe, and it's all or nothing for Jassim.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Another comment says, thank you, Ben, for giving us so much insight. Fantastic guest. Michael, do you want to ask him anything else? Just again, still a few more questions here. People just going mental. But
do you reckon Do you? I understand it's a very very complicated process. It's not a rocket science, or we can't say Jack Robinson, and of course everything gets sorted. But do you think that before we get to the summer window, this whole process will get to its conclusion, if you know what I mean? Probably we know who the new owner will be, and of course, funds will be sorted out for Eric Ten Hag in the transfer window. Because I saw a report yesterday, Fabrizio and some other outlets reported Jude Bellingham's, possible Real Madrid deal. Now, and recall before now, they were interested, according to reports, Manchester United were interested in. We had interest, though we didn't make a bid for the player. Now, do you reckon we sort out this whole sale thing before the start of the transfer window? Because there is the likelihood of missing out on top targets. Because if the manager or the club don't know what is going to happen, you know, between now and the transfer window, the start of the transfer window. Now, do you think it could affect our recruitment? Do you think it could affect how the club will go out there in the transfer market to get a player? We mentioned the Kane, we mentioned the Hurricane, we mentioned an Osimhen, and of course a host of other targets. So, do you think this lingering, and boring, sorry to say that, but boring process, because it's already bored. We are all bored. Like Manchester United fans are all bored by the lingering process up till date. So, do you think, or do you reckon that it's going to affect our transfer window?
Well, again, number one thing that affects transfer window is the Champions League qualification. And number two that then affects transfer window is potentially a new ownership group. But as I said before, they're still bound by the financial cycles and books that they inherit. So it's not like anyone can just come in because they're new, even if they're rich, and just dump a load of money down. So the lack of clarity is what ultimately affects things, because if the transfer window opens and Manchester United don't have clarity, whether that's with the Glazers or without the Glazers, there's a big problem, because so much of the planning takes place to get deals done early in the window. And players often like the fact that they can make up their mind early, and in doing so, have stability and join up with their new team in pre-season. So the first sort of 14 days of the window, or certainly 3 weeks, are really, really important, which means that if Manchester United don't know whose money they're spending, then they won't be able to complete deals, because the Glazers may say, well, you got to wait to complete that transfer until the new owner comes in. And this is problematic, because if Manchester United are succeeding, every single player they'll go for will have competition. So even if they pick Manchester United hands down, there's always going to be competition. If you're a top club going for a top player, nobody can tell me, even with Bellingham now likely to join Real Madrid, of course there's been competition. Liverpool have tried in the past, Manchester City have tried in the past. So the last thing Manchester United will want is not being able to move, because there may be some targets out there that are clear-cut and prepared to be patient and wait. But there may be others that are 50-50. They genuinely don't know if it's Manchester United or if it's Real Madrid. And that's when you have fine margins. And one fine margin might be Manchester United can't sign you yet, or Manchester United don't know for sure who their owner's going to be, who their sporting director's going to be. Is there going to be a change of heart? Is there going to be a change of budget? Who are you negotiating with in terms of ultimately trying to get these deals done? So that clarity is needed, because remember, there'll be people at Manchester United, if Jassim comes in, and probably if Ratcliffe comes in, that may not keep their jobs. And this is normal. Chelsea did a 100-day review. So by the time we were in the middle part of the window, Marina was gone, Buck was gone, Bowley was sporting director and chairman. And I'm not saying that that will be the case definitively. And I should also point out that both these groups will give everyone at the football club fair chance to keep their jobs. But as with any takeover in any business, it's completely normal that some new personnel are going to come in and be very senior decision makers at the football club. So the sooner there's clarity, the sooner the review can happen, the sooner the transition can happen. And if those incoming figures have got different views, different opinions of personnel, of budgets, then the club may go in a different direction. And that's how it affects the window. And I think that Ten Hag came in last summer and unfortunately was overshadowed by the Ronaldo situation, which ate into the window. It created uncertainty, and that was very difficult for him as a new manager. So the last thing that he wants is to have a year now, move in the right direction, plan everything, and then find that a new owner's got a different idea or an old owner's got a different budget. And this, again, is why it has to happen before the window opens, so everybody, but particularly Ten Hag, knows exactly what he stands, because he can plan accordingly. And if it runs 3 weeks into the window, then that might cost Manchester United a target. So it is very important. But again, forgetting the transition, forgetting the logistics, and forgetting the personnel side, if we're solely talking about a number that anyone can spend, the most important thing that will define that number is Manchester United qualify for Champions League football.
Nice. Well, I think we'll end it there. We could go all day and night. For anyone who did ask us questions in the comments, we tried to get through as much as we could. But I'm sure we got enough info out. I mean, Ben, thanks for coming on. You gave us a lot more information than we expected, so we appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you reckon you could give us a cheeky prediction for the match tonight?
It's a tough one, isn't it? It's a big game, especially because, Newcastle are flying above and Liverpool are picking up points behind and Brighton are still in the European race. So if I'm Manchester United with the game in hand over Newcastle still, which is obviously very important, and having played 2 games less than Liverpool, if I walk away from Brighton with a point, I don't think that's a disaster. And given the form that Brighton are on, if it finishes 2-2, I think that's okay. Because I think Manchester United win away at West Ham, in my opinion. I think they beat Wolves. I think that they don't lose to Bournemouth. I think they beat Chelsea. And I think if they need anything from the final game, they beat Fulham. So my prediction is Manchester United are undefeated between now and the end of the season, which makes it, for me, almost impossible for Liverpool to catch them. But tonight, and I hate to say this because I could just come on a podcast and lie to you and say 2-1 Manchester United, but I'm going to give you my honest opinion, which is a 2-2 draw.
I said the same thing myself. I'd take it. I'd have to take it. I mean, Ben, where can also people find you as well, like socials or anything like that?
At Jacobs Ben on Twitter, at Ben David Jacobs on TikTok, which is a new one, and Instagram. Instagram really just has dog photos, if I'm honest at this point. But TikTok will be more active over the transfer window. So yeah, at Ben David Jacobs, Instagram, TikTok, and at Jacobs Ben on Twitter.
Nice. And Michael as well, thanks for coming on. We definitely it was exciting. And Ben, we hope to have you on again sometime in the near future. I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate having back on. But yeah, it was a brilliant show. And as I said, we have the watch along for the match will be tonight. So join me at around 7:30 for that. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing. All our socials are in the description. You can see a few on the edit there under us 3. And yeah, as I said, Ben, thanks for coming on. And Michael, legend as always. And yeah, I'll speak to you all in a bit. Have a good one.
All the best, everyone. Take care.